Eu queria passar a palavra para o Armando Arruda Pereira, de Campos Melo, presidente executivo da União Brasileira de Promotores de Feiras. E, Armando, depois da apresentação do Paul, como é que está o mercado brasileiro de feiras de negócios?
Bom dia a todos. Primeiro, eu queria agradecer a Otávio e Roberta pela oportunidade de estarmos aqui, na parceria de Juan, de Paul, da Lígia e do Sérgio. Como vocês podem ver, neste palco tem 2 de gravata borboleta. É uma homenagem nossa à elegância do Paul. Eu não posso perder a oportunidade, com esse público, de contar um pouquinho como andam as feiras no Brasil. Provavelmente alguns atores principais estão aqui presentes, pode ser um pouco repetitivo, mas como a gente concluiu ao BRAF alguns estudos nos últimos meses do ano passado, eu acho importante passar para vocês. Nós conseguimos fazer um levantamento, considerando alguns calendários de diversas fontes, a um número de 2.222 feiras no Brasil, reunindo as nossas feiras mais B2B, considerando também o agronegócio. Como no nosso país o agronegócio paga uma boa parte da conta, como economia primária e na balança de exportação, esse setor movimenta a cadeia produtiva tanto quanto a nossa nos pavilhões. São feiras em outros sítios, em outras regiões, das mais diferentes do Brasil. Mas, de toda forma, é importante fazer uma apresentação um pouco mais segmentada. Nós temos 922 feiras do setor que oferece e apresenta serviços à indústria e 1.300 feiras no setor do agronegócio. Como é que elas estão distribuídas? 48% na região sudeste, ou seja, exatamente na reunião mais desenvolvida, onde se encontra o mercado, é que as nossas apresentações, os nossos shows e a nossa promoção comercial é realizada. Eu já cumprimentei o Faveco hoje, que ele está por aí, e o Faveco tem uma frase, uma colocação muito feliz: nós somos mídia presencial. Isso é muito importante, porque nós somos um momento em que o produto é visto, ele pode oferecer todos os sentidos para aquele visitante, numa amostra segmentada, numa amostra em que estão ali os concorrentes. E as feiras no Brasil ainda têm mais uma característica: elas são profundamente democráticas. Você tem um conjunto de estandes de 6 metros, 4 metros do Sebrae, ao lado das maiores empresas do mundo. Isso oferece ao visitante a verdadeira leitura de um mercado, desde o mais simples insumo até um produto final. A segunda região é a região sul do Brasil, com 30,6%, a região nordeste, com 10,4%. A gente tem um case de sucesso, que é a RID, nos últimos tempos, fazendo um volume muito importante de feiras em Recife, que foi uma das regiões brasileiras que teve um desenvolvimento econômico e social mais acelerado no Brasil. Esse levantamento foi feito considerando os calendários da UBRAF, Feiras do Brasil, da Associação Brasileira de Marketing do Agronegócio. Depois você me dá a bronca do tempo, Otávio, que
Eu queria que você fizesse, depois da sua apresentação, a pergunta para o Paul.
Então, vou tocando
por
aqui,
favor.
Depois eu pergunto para o Paul. Bom, o Paul fez uma referência muito importante quando a gente fala da nossa relação com a cidade e com os governos. Nós, na cidade de São Paulo, o nosso setor, no estudo de 13 a 14, que mediu 800 eventos, as principais feiras e mais congressos que tenham feira significativa, o impacto econômico na casa de 16,3 bilhões de reais. Isso é representativamente um dado de desenvolvimento dessa cidade. Nós oferecemos mão de obra extensiva, a nossa cadeia produtiva atinge todo mundo fala aí, 52 segmentos. Eu não conseguiria relatar todos, mas deve ser por volta disso. Mas, se a gente considerar hotelaria, a gastronomia, o entretenimento, a visitação e as compras, na nossa cidade, é muito provável que esse número aumente. O que eu estava ontem ainda em reunião com o Paul, colocando que a gente pretende realizar esse estudo novamente em 2 anos, assim que os novos equipamentos estiverem funcionando na cidade, em operação. Nós vamos ter um incremento. Hoje nós temos 270 mil metros quadrados de oferta diária em pavilhão, e nós iremos para uma oferta de 370 mil metros quadrados. Isso vai mudar esse número, vai mudar o número da hotelaria, vai mudar o número da gastronomia, das agências de viagem, da locação de carro, etc. Mas é importante que os poderes constituídos nos leiam como parceiros da cidade, como indutores da riqueza da cidade. Nós trazemos dinheiro novo. O dinheiro que um evento traz para uma cidade como São Paulo, uma megalópole, é dinheiro novo. É dinheiro que, se esse evento fosse feito em outra cidade, esse dinheiro não estaria aqui. Então, é muito importante que haja essa compreensão e que nós sejamos lidos com uma atenção especial como um dos principais indutores da economia da cidade. Paul, agradecendo a sua visita e as nossas conversas, você já esteve no Brasil aqui, essa é a sua 4ª visita, e você tem acompanhado os nossos números que a UFE, como nós somos associados, recebe. Você apresentou algumas coisas de inovação, muito quanto a formatos e o público novo. Essa leitura que você nos traz, ela é um pouco anglo-saxônica, ou ela se adaptaria com uma certa facilidade a nós, latinos, e principalmente de língua portuguesa?
Thanks, Armando. No, I don't think that is a British view, although I am British. The thinking that went into those presentations came from groups of people from all over the world. And of course, how that is implemented will depend on the industry that's being served. It will depend on the business culture in each country. So what we described as the show in the US, where people sit in beanbags in the middle of the room, is not very likely to happen at an industrial machinery show in China, of course. So, of course, you know, there are many variables there, but I don't believe this is something that is just happening in the US or just happening in Europe. I think those trends that we talked about, and particularly driven by young people coming into the workforce, coming into our companies, who have grown up in an entirely different world of communication, do need to be addressed in different ways. Will some of the big fairs survive as they look today in many places? Maybe. It's quite possible that some will. But, you know, others won't unless we adapt them and change them to the expectations of the new generation. So I don't think it's a British or even a European view, because the input we had to that discussion was for people from all over the world.
Okay. Muito obrigado, Otávio, muito obrigado. Voltando ali para o meu cantinho. Obrigado.
Obrigado, Armando. Bom, Lígia, eu queria passar a palavra para você, poder perguntar para o Paul também. A Lígia, que é diretora-geral da Nuremberg Mayors Brasil e vice-presidente da UFE para a América Latina. E obrigado por estar aqui conosco, viu, Lígia?
Obrigada pelo convite, bom dia a todos. Paul, a gente percebe uma necessidade constante de profissionalização deste mercado. A gente viu no slide, as plantas baixas continuam como antes, algumas coisas não mudam. Em que a UFE pode ajudar no sentido de compartilhar com o Brasil boas práticas deste mercado e constante ou melhoria no processo de profissionalização dos nossos funcionários, das pessoas que estão trabalhando nesse mercado e dos novos funcionários, das pessoas, do pessoal novo que está entrando nesse mercado.
Thank you, Ligia. That's a very important question, no doubt about that. And when we, each year during our UFI Congress, we get together a roundtable meeting of the CEOs of our 22 largest companies. The 22 largest companies in UFI have what we call a group member status, so all of their global subsidiaries are included, and in fact your boss comes to that meeting as well. And 2 years ago, I think we went around the table and we asked the basic journalist question, really, what keeps you awake at night? I mean, what is the thing that really worries you the most about the future of the business? And without a doubt, it was that issue of how can we more effectively recruit, retain, and develop the skills of the workforce of tomorrow. Because we are a relatively small industry in terms of our employment, we have very little profile at the university level. Very, very few of you, I suspect, out there in the room, left university with a dream to be in the exhibition business. There may be one or two exceptions. Germany is an exception, and sometimes, although you're representing a German company, Ligia, we have to put Germany on one side because Germany is very unusual. But most countries, this is normal. So there are several things that we can do about that. One is that we are working to try to raise the profile of the industry with the younger generation, with students. Social media gives us a great opportunity to do that and to reach out to them, and some of you who are with us have seen the video that UFI has produced with young people saying why this is a great industry to work in. This is a very small step, certainly not a solution to the problem, but it's an important step. Secondly, we among the leadership in the industry are trying to get a dialogue going at the level of the HR directors of the big companies about what they need and what more we can do. And we had the first meeting in Paris in December last year with about 20 HR managers from top international companies addressing those issues. Thirdly, of course, there's the issue of education, both for people working within our companies and working together with universities, business schools, other institutions on trying to make sure, at the very minimum, that exhibitions and events and what we do is talked about. I was horrified recently, or end of last year, I was asked to speak at a conference in London. And I talked about trends in the exhibition industry. It was a group of freight forwarders servicing the exhibition industry. And I talked about exhibitions. And a young lady ran up to me after the presentation, which doesn't happen to me very often. I have to say I'm much too old for that to happen very often these days. So was nice. And she said, that was a great talk. And I said, oh, thank you. And she said, I just graduated from a 3-year event management degree, and they did not mention the exhibition industry one time in the 3 years of the degree, which tells me that we still have a huge... In the UK, it's music festivals, planning weddings, planning big events, lots of fun stuff. But the big business that generates real profits and real jobs, which is our industry, is not regarded as very sexy or exciting, so it doesn't get mentioned. So we have some basic jobs to do there. And then working with the industry, we are trying to tailor the education programs that we provide to meet the needs that people see for the future. Also to basically be a resource for local institutions. Although we have a big profile, we're a small organization, and we can't do so much globally. So we also want to find ways, the best ways that we can support local initiatives, such as the Academy, which I know Sergio, you and Armando are involved with, so that we can add resources in a way that they would be useful, and then that you can find ways to deliver content and deliver programs to students, to young people working in the industry in their own language. As you can see, as you can hear this morning, we operate in English. Your industry does not operate in English here. You need to be able to operate, offer education to your people in their own language. So, sorry, slightly long answer, but it's such an important issue. I thought I needed to touch on those things. Thank you.
Juan Pablo, presidente da Reed Exhibition. Alcântara Machado e presidente do Conselho de Administração do São Paulo Convention and Visitors Bureau. Juan, queria que você fizesse a sua pergunta para o Paul, para a gente poder dar continuidade à discussão.
Obrigado, Otávio. Parabéns, Paul, pela apresentação. Acho que você conseguiu, em poucos slides, poder apresentar um quadro a nível mundial do que está acontecendo no setor de feiras. Eu realmente tenho uma inquietude muito similar ao que a Alicia apresentou aqui. Estou muito confiante na capacidade que os empreendimentos que estão sendo continuam a ser desenvolvidos na cidade nos vão dar a oportunidade de contar com um novo espaço cada vez mais moderno e mais confiante para que nossos clientes consigam ter uma participação mais, com uma experiência melhor em nossos eventos, mas acho que a grande preocupação que nós temos é cada vez mais com pessoas, sim, com talento. E acho que o grande desafio para todos nós que tivemos a oportunidade de crescer no ambiente como o ambiente das feiras de negócios, hoje não só de reter, sino também não só de recrutar, sino também de reter o talento que conseguimos desenvolver em nossas empresas. Então, tive a experiência de aprender de nossos colegas na RID no Japão. Eles, para fazer o recrutamento de pessoas, eles fazem um dia de treinamento, no qual entrevistam em um espaço no Japão 2.000 candidatos. Desses 2.000 candidatos são escolhidos os 200 melhores que passam a uma entrevista personal no mesmo dia. Dos 200 melhores, 20 são escolhidos e desses 20, dois são contratados. Então, de 2.000, eles conseguem selecionar 2 pessoas. Hoje, na equipe de 14 diretores que fazem parte da RID no Japão, todos eles passaram pelo processo de recrutamento, começando pela empresa sendo júniores. Depois de 24 anos, continuam a trabalhar na empresa. E a RID no Japão está celebrando esse ano 26 anos de atingimento de metas e de resultados e de crescimento em um país que não cresce há muito tempo, verdade? O Japão é uma economia que não consegue crescer. Então, acho que a grande preocupação de todos é como nós podemos desenvolver equipes que consigam enxergar o setor de eventos como um espaço no qual investir sua carreira, porque é um espaço não só agradável e desafiador, sino também um espaço no qual vale a pena acreditar para os próximos anos. Aprendi que as águias têm muita confiança, não no galho no qual eles se sustentam da árvore, sino na capacidade de suas asas, na capacidade de sua visão, na sua capacidade de constantemente manter o instinto de ser bons caçadores. Como podemos desenvolver mais águias e como podemos fazer para que elas façam parte de nossas equipes segundo a visão da UFAI?
Wow, it's a challenging question, and I'm not sure I have a particularly good answer to that. I mean, I think one thing as well, as I said earlier, if you went around the room and asked people to stick up their hands as to how many had started off wanting to get into the exhibition industry, it would be very few. But if you now ask people who are here to stick up their hands and ask how many of them love the business, it would be most people. Once people have accidentally discovered this business, they tend to love it or leave very quickly, because the pressures of, if it's somebody who wants to come to work and do the same thing every day and know exactly what they're going to be doing for the whole year round, they're not well suited to our industry. But people who enjoy the project management, they enjoy the human interactions, they enjoy the excitement, frankly, of building up an exhibition and seeing it work, love the industry and stay there for a long time. So my sense is that the retention is less of a challenge. I mean, but I do think, sort of touching on some of your other points there, you know, the business will almost certainly become more complicated for many of the industries that we serve. You know, this idea of tailoring the experience of the event to individual visitors, it's not easy. I mean, you know that within Reed through the travel events that are organized around the world for the Reed Travel. You can only do those traveler events if you almost hold each individual key visitor by the hand and lead them around the room. It's very labor intensive, it's quite complicated, but it's the only way to do business in that particular industry, and it's probably a lesson to many others that we work in as well. That requires a whole different skill sets from the sort of the fairly basic sales and sort of then the logistics, operational management skills that we've looked for in our teams in traditional trade fairs. And then once you start to put in a sort of digital communications mix, and I don't mean, as you and I discussed yesterday, I don't mean just marketing. I mean, it's now pretty obvious that you should not separate the words marketing and digital marketing. They all mean the same thing, and we all do it. Everybody's using digital tools for promoting their events. We're all using, to one degree or another, digital tools for managing the exhibitor experience. Very few people these days produce a traditional exhibitor manual. Almost everybody is using online forms for that in one way or another. I mean, your company certainly in some parts of the world has already gone quite a long way in using electronic floor plans, dynamic pricing, all of these sorts of exciting things. The third step, so we've got promoting our events, we've got servicing the people. The third step, and the hardest, of course, is actually sort of integrating digital offerings into our, into our business. And everybody, I think, is struggling with that, but it clearly requires different types of people. So I think we see a very different mix of employees in the exhibition company in 5 years' time to the one that we saw 5 years ago. I mean, my sense, correct me if I'm wrong, my sense is that transition is already underway. You probably already have in your office today a quite different mix of people to the one that was there 5 or 10 years ago. But in 5 years' time, it will be different still again, which probably means that a very basic education program that focuses on the logistics of operations on a trade fair site, that focuses on sales and marketing for the trade fair industry, not generally rocket science, not all that hard. Of course, those things are necessary, but we're going to have to be looking at other areas as well. So I'm not sure that quite answers your question, but that's my perspective on that.
Eu vou passar a palavra para o Sérgio Medina Pasqualin, que é o presidente da Academia Brasileira de Eventos e Turismo e diretor do Expo Center Norte.
Paul, realmente uma excelente apresentação, good teaser, boas provocações e, coincidentemente, alguns assuntos que foram tratados aqui, eu gostaria de reforçar um pouquinho. Otávio, obrigado aí pelo convite. E eventos como esse provocam, fazem com que o nosso setor venha conversar e ocupar o lugar que merece no mercado. Paul, McCormick Place, em torno de 200 mil metros quadrados. Orange County, em torno de 200 mil metros quadrados. Messe Düsseldorf, 300 mil metros quadrados. Messe Nuremberg, 170 mil metros quadrados. Com uma característica em comum. Todas essas cidades têm essas áreas num único pavilhão. São Paulo, 260 a 270 mil metros quadrados em 5 pavilhões. E com expansão, prevendo 340, 350 mil metros quadrados, alguns números muito parecidos com o que o Armando falou, que tem algumas definições ainda a serem feitas. Comparativamente, São Paulo atualmente tem uma área adequada ao mercado. Qual a sua visão, tendo estas cidades, como Düsseldorf, como Chicago, como Nuremberg e outras, com um único pavilhão, e São Paulo com 5 pavilhões? Depois eu tenho mais 2 perguntas complementando esta.
Well, thank you very much for that question, Sergio. I mean, when the venue situation changes significantly in a city, it is clearly an unsettling time for the industry. Things are going to change, so these sorts of questions get asked. Now, a number of strands in your question. The first one, is it better to have one big venue in the city? Well, I think the answer to that would have to be it depends on the city. Germany is not really a good example. I mean, people look to Germany typically and they say, wow, it'd be fabulous to, why can't we be like Germany? Could we have the German model? It seems to work much better. Well, you know, there are several issues in Germany. Most of the German cities are very small. I mean, Nuremberg is a lovely place, an important city, but it would fit into one small district in Sao Paulo, of which there are about 30. So, you know, and that's true of most of the German cities. Other than Berlin, most of the German cities are very small. They have a history of many hundreds of years of trade fairs in many cases. Thirdly, and this is always the element of the recipe I say to people they don't want, most of the German cities were completely destroyed in World War II. There were large areas of open space on which they rebuilt exhibition centers and used the exhibition industry to rebuild the German economy in the 1950s. So, I mean, that's frankly a part of the recipe that nobody wants, but it's an important component as to why the German exhibition industry is so important today. The government took it on as the task of using trade fairs as a key tool for rebuilding the German economy in the 1950s. The US is a different story, but I mean, there are actually in Chicago multiple venues. I mean, I would look at other cities of probably comparable economic importance to Sao Paulo, and Shanghai would be a good example. I mean, Shanghai is now probably, arguably, the single largest exhibition city in the world, bigger than anything in Europe, bigger than anything in the US, much bigger than Las Vegas. If Shanghai were a country, it would be the second largest exhibition market in Asia. It's bigger than Japan. They now have 11 exhibition centers in Shanghai, and they just went from 400,000 square meters to 800,000 square meters because they just built a new venue which has 410,000 square meters of indoor space. As you can imagine, the type of discussions that you're having here in Sao Paulo are being had, you know, dramatically more strongly in Shanghai at the moment, not least because the manager and main investor in that new venue is also the largest exhibition organizer in China. So they are very nervous now that the owner of the venue is going to come in and squeeze out other legitimate exhibition organizers. That does not appear to be the scenario here in Sao Paulo. You don't, generally speaking, have venues which are significant organizers. I don't know if some of them organize a few events, but by and large, you know, your venues work as venues and they provide a service to organizers, which is to be welcomed. It would appear to me, as I said at the beginning, I am most certainly not an expert on the Brazilian exhibition industry, but based on my previous visits and discussions with people on the panel here and others of you in the room, there would appear to me to be plenty of demand potential here in Sao Paulo. So will a big new venue upset things slightly? Yes, of course it will. It will make life a bit more complicated for the other venues, and it will make life a bit more complicated for the organizers too. They have to decide, do they want to move? If they don't move, what's going to happen in the new venue? Or if they do move, what's going to happen in the old venue? You know, it raises discussions about competition and how do we manage competition in a city like this, to which my personal opinion, this is not official UFI policy, but my personal opinion is please do not try. Because once you start trying to manage competition, once you start trying to invite the government to help you with policies, then, well, you have to be careful what you wish for, because bringing in governments is, in China, using the example, because similarly important city, after 20 years of lobbying, we finally got them to undo some of the licensing systems and complications of government involvement in exhibitions there, which, as we all know, leads at the very best to complication and extra expense, and in worst cases leads to corruption and other things as well, because put government officials into the position of having some control over licenses and other things, and you cause trouble in many countries in the world. I speak not particularly of here, but of many countries in the world. So I would only be worried, I would only really be worried if it did not look to me as though there was significant demand for more space here in Sao Paulo, and it's pretty clear to me there is significant demand. For 2 to 3 years, things will be a little unsettled, but I would say in a 5 to 10 year scenario, my personal perspective would be that this is very good news for Sao Paulo. It's very good news for all, particularly of the more modern venues here, and it's good news for the organizers. So overall, I would have to say this is a good news story for the global exhibition industry that everybody is watching very carefully and with great interest, because clearly in 4 to 5 years' time, once things settle down a little bit, you will have an exhibition industry here in Sao Paulo that looks very different, and secondly, is much more able to meet some of the future demands of our customers that I was talking about just a little bit in my presentation.
Okay, very good. Não por coincidência, mas até por consequência, você no final abordou uma coisa interessante, que vai direcionar para a segunda pergunta. De um modo geral, os pavilhões no exterior promovem feiras, coisa essa que não acontece no Brasil ainda. Então, dentro da sua experiência internacional, com esse aumento de área que vai acontecer em São Paulo, que atualmente só existem promotores que fazem as feiras e os pavilhões ainda não, como é que você vê isto dentro dessa maneira mais confortável de demanda de mercado?
Yeah, I mean, it's not really true to say that the model, the German model, for example, or the Italian model, where the venue is also the largest organizer, is not particularly a global norm. It is not the norm in the United States. I mean, in fact, that is a subject of rather hot debate in the US right now, because the cities in the US are beginning, most of the venues in the US, in fact, I think all of the major venues in the US are funded by city government and by local hotel taxes normally. The city governments are beginning to withdraw funding and telling the venues that they need to be self-sufficient, which is making the venues quite worried. And so there is a discussion ongoing in the US about whether the venues should start to become organizers, more to emulate the German model. As you can imagine, the organizers in the US are very unhappy about this. Continental Europe, Western Europe, actually in the former Soviet Union area as well, typically follows the model that we might describe as the German model, where the venue is also its own largest organizer. There are sort of pros and cons to that. I mean, it does mean that there is relatively little activity in Germany, for example, from other commercial companies. I think typically most of the messes in Germany organize between 70 and 90% of their own business. I mean, they have a phrase in German which translates as guest event, which tells you, frankly, precisely how they regard third-party organizers coming to the event. They will treat you as a guest if you're lucky, if they can find space for you. So for commercial organizers, that's not a particularly happy model. In the UK and in most of Asia, the venues and organizers are also separate. Where I see venues beginning to move towards organizing, maybe in areas where, frankly, they have been less successful in filling themselves, particularly in the low seasons. I don't know exactly what your seasons are here in Brazil, but I mean in Europe and Asia, certainly the springtime, so March, April, May, autumn, September, October, November are the busy times. Middle of the winter, December, January, and the middle of the summer, the European summer, say June, July, August, very, very quiet. And venues, some have got quite innovative in bringing in events which maybe in the summer attract school children who are on holiday and those sorts of things, which are simply just to sort of keep a venue going when at other times it would have been empty, rather than their main business model. So there are many, many different approaches around the world. I would have thought, given again what I understand at the level of demand for modern good quality venue space here in Sao Paulo, that I would think it's relatively unlikely that there would be a need for the venues here to look seriously at changing their business models to survive. I suspect there's plenty of business to go around to, you know, whether they get involved in some events, I don't know, but I would be quite surprised if it, and you know, I represent an organization of exhibition organizers. 75% of UFI's members are exhibition organizers. So from the biased perspective of the exhibition organizer, we, I would say, would prefer that the venues did not become too much involved in organizing, although we would politely and respectfully recognize that our German friends have a very successful business model of their own. So, yeah.
Maybe part of the innovation.
Yeah.
Ok, so, agora uma segunda parte. Eu agora tiro o chapéu como diretor do Expo Center Norte e ponho o chapéu da Academia Brasileira de Eventos e Turismo. Foi mencionado por você a importância da parte educacional. E não por coincidência, nós, na academia, como você já sabe, estamos desenvolvendo um projeto educacional envolvendo as universidades no Brasil. O que o Juan Pablo falou, que no Japão, por exemplo, os processos de recrutamento e seleção começaram com 2.000 pessoas, né, Juan? E terminaram em 2. Eu talvez aqui não esteja errando muito, eu acho que nós não temos 2.000 pessoas envolvidas entre promotoras, organizadoras e pavilhões. Então, realmente é uma necessidade que nós temos e está sendo desenvolvido isso. Então, entendemos também que a parte educacional é fundamental e com uma formação desde a universidade. Esse é um trabalho que está sendo desenvolvido com as portas da Messe Düsseldorf, para a gente poder ter brasileiros participando de programas e aqui grandes universidades, FAAP, GV, ESPM, AMB Morumbi e Senac envolvidas. E nós, então, enviamos para você, e aqui eu reforço perante o nosso trade, a necessidade de apoios, como o caso da UFI, para esse desenvolvimento que é benéfico para todo o trade no Brasil.
Thank you, Sergio. And as I mentioned earlier, this is a very high priority for us. We take the lead from the most senior management of our largest companies, and they clearly say to me that this is an area on which they want UFI to focus a lot of attention. So, in principle, I can certainly say that, you know, we will be delighted to work with you and your colleagues here to find the best ways in which UFI can support this kind of program. I think it's an innovative program. I mean, one of the themes of this conference is innovation, and it seems to me an innovative program which I'm sure as it evolves will develop in a very interesting way. You know, and maybe this is an opportunity that we can hold up Brazil's initiatives as an example that other countries which have a similar concern might be able to follow, because the sorts of concerns that you've mentioned there are certainly ones which are shared in other particularly big markets for the industry. If you're talking about a smallish city, small industry, not such a big problem. It doesn't require so many people. But with the way in which the industry has expanded here, with the expansion opportunities that we know are coming along, you have a big business here which is going to need a lot of good quality people. So I think it's a great initiative that we should, we will be discussing further, I know. So I look forward to talking to you more about it and sort of working out the best ways that we can support.
Thank you.
Otávio, se você me permite, queria fazer uma colocação. Achei bem oportuna a pergunta do Sérgio em quanto aos pavilhões e a relação com os organizadores e até onde pavilhão consigue se consagrar como um grande pavilhão, consigue se consagrar como grande realizador, organizador. Eu, seguindo alguns exemplos de outros mercados, acho que fica bastante claro os modelos que têm tido sucesso e quais não, mas acho que seria algo parecido como que o shopping center querer produzir sua própria roupa para vender nas lojas de moda, ou como que os aeroportos queiram fazer suas próprias companhias aéreas para poder concorrer com seu próprio cliente, ou como se os supermercados quisessem fazer suas próprias marcas para concorrer com as empresas que estão aí. Acho que essas indústrias nos demonstraram que quanto mais especialização, mais excelência cada sabe fazer no seu setor, fica melhor. Acho que a consequência do que aconteceu na Alemanha foi o contrário. Organizadores de eventos que não encontraram pavilhões competentes desenvolveram seus próprios pavilhões. Então, eu hoje acho que não é o business de nenhum organizador construir seu próprio pavilhão. Acho que cada entende a reciprocidade dos serviços e o valor agregado que pode ter. E eu acredito que os melhores pavilhões que saibam oferecer os melhores serviços ao preço justo, com excelente relacionamento com seus clientes, vão conseguir que as melhores feiras, com os melhores clientes, as melhores indústrias, continuem a fazer o business dos pavilhões continuar a crescer, que acho que é bom business aqui no Brasil, e os grandes grupos de investimentos estão conseguindo desenvolver planos de negócios de longo prazo, trabalhando junto com seus clientes, que acho que é a solução que nós enxergamos para mercado crescente, mercado em expansão, como poderá ser o mercado do Brasil nos próximos anos.
Paul, queria que você concluísse a colocação do Juan Pablo.
I'm not sure I have too much to add to that. I mean, I would, other than to say I agree. I mean, the only point that occurs to me in picking up on the earlier question and what Pablo mentioned there is that there probably are, going forward, opportunities for different business relationships between venues and organizers. I think there are opportunities in the future for different kinds of partnerships, particularly if we look at some of the more innovative events that I talked about there, where maybe the revenue is not from the traditional floor plan. I mean, I was a bit rude about our conservative approach to the floor plan, but there, as you all well know, there's a very good reason the floor plan looks like that, because it is the most efficient way of squeezing the most amount of money out of an exhibition hall floor that the fire brigade will allow you, basically. You know, if you're lucky and you have a sellout show, you squeeze as much in there as you possibly can. So, you know, round stands or big spaces in the middle of the hall, as we traditionally price our events, do not make you money, and that's why they're not there. If you want to organize an event with large open spaces, but where maybe you charge the attendees a far higher price to come in, because their networking with each other is the biggest value you get, then maybe you need a different business model with the exhibition hall, where instead of paying the traditional X dollars per square meter per day, There's some spaces paid for, some revenue share on the gate money. I mean, you know, you might need to look more at sports stadiums and how the music industry pays for its venues than perhaps how traditionally the exhibition industry has. So maybe innovative partnerships between organizers and the venues, rather than seeing the venues launching themselves firmly out into the market as organizers. I mean, I agree by and large, Juan Pablo, with what you said, although, you know, one thing that makes me nervous with the retail analogy is that actually, certainly in Europe, the fastest growing segment of supermarket sales is supermarket-owned brands. So, you know, maybe well, it was a niche, but it's getting pretty big now. I think as people get price sensitive, they realize that the Tesco-owned brand washing liquid is actually pretty much the same stuff. In fact, in some cases, it's exactly the same stuff as in the branded bottle that costs 20% more. No, it's not produced by Tesco, but it has, no, well, that's true. Okay, well, maybe we have the venue branded event organized by the organizers, but okay, fair point.
Muito bem. As raízes do negócio feira, tanto na Europa quanto nos Estados Unidos, são diferentes das raízes do negócio feira no Brasil. E, de fato, nós estamos num momento em que o modelo brasileiro passará para um outro modelo. Depende de nós, desse bom entrosamento, cada um sabendo ocupar seu espaço e reconhecendo que algumas cidades, como Hannover, por exemplo, estão reduzindo seus pavilhões pelo fato de custar mais dinheiro mantê-los do que desmontá-los. Então, é uma coisa que se coloca para a gente construir em conjunto.
Paul, eu queria fazer uma pergunta para você. É a quinta vez que você vem para o Brasil, você deve ter visitado alguns pavilhões, algumas feiras aqui no nosso país, principalmente aqui em São Paulo. O que você percebeu que nós temos de diferente dos outros mercados, como a Europa, a China e o próprio Estados Unidos?
That's a good question. I'm not sure. It's actually only my third visit, unfortunately, so I still have some work to do to I mean, talking about Sao Paulo particularly, I mean, the size of the city is, you know, both an opportunity and a challenge for the industry, of course. I mean, it's when you're in a relatively small German city, the Messe is typically right in the middle of the city or very near to the city center. It's very easy for people to get to and from. So you have a number of quite practical challenges here. I mean, you also have the issue that this is a huge country. Again, you know, so the industry is currently very, very concentrated here in Sao Paulo. And I suspect, given the developments in venues, the focus of the industry will continue to be particularly here on Sao Paulo over the next few years. But Armando, in his presentation, talked about the, you know, the regional spread of the industry, and this clearly is going to be a country in which, you know, the one city story is not the story for the future. I mean, will Sao Paulo remain the most important exhibition city in Brazil? Of course it will. I'm sure it will for the foreseeable future. But will we see the emergence of interesting other activity in many parts, or, you know, further development? Because when I say emergence, it implies there's nothing there today, but of course there is. But will we see interesting further development? Yes, although some events we know work best as big, centralized events, attracting people not just from all over Brazil, but frankly from all over the region. And there's clearly still opportunity, further opportunity to be developed for the big events here in Sao Paulo to be genuinely Latin American regional events. I know many of them aspire to be, and a few of them actually are, but it seems to me a big opportunity for that. So I'm not sure I could really put my finger on one or two things that I say are particularly different about Brazil. Of course, I mean, you have a unique business culture here that expresses itself in events in its own particular way. But, I mean, that's true of every country, you know. I mean, Juan Pablo mentioned their business in Japan. It's an extraordinary business, driven by a rather sort of remarkable leader who's taken that company on over 25 years. You know, in a trade fair in Japan, the mood, I mean, it might look actually not so different. If you walk in the door, other than the Japanese writing, it wouldn't look so different to an exhibition in one of your more modern exhibition halls here in Brazil. But the way in which people interact with each other, the way they do business together is quite different. And that means that the way the events are organized is going to be different. But actually at heart, you know, we're in the handshake business. We're introducing people to each other, to old friends, people they haven't met before, businesses they haven't met before. The fundamentals of the business are actually the same everywhere. And that's why it's strong, because it's actually quite a simple story at heart. Lots of complicated frills that we all like to talk about, but at heart a relatively simple story of introducing people to each other, giving them new business opportunities.
Acho que aqui no Brasil, cada vez mais nós temos apertos de mãos internacionais. O Brasil tem recebido muitos visitantes internacionais e eu queria que você, numa próxima oportunidade, se você pudesse visitar uma feira, não só da REED, mas também da Nuremberg, para poder estar mais junto no carpete, andar na feira e poder sentir um pouco a maneira do Brasil, do brasileiro, de fazer a feira e participar da feira. Lígia, eu queria que você falasse também com o Paul. Você que é de uma promotora alemã, eu tive a oportunidade de estar lá em Nuremberg, conhecer toda a estrutura da Nuremberg Mess, e aqui no Brasil você realiza as feiras em diferentes pavilhões. Você tem feiras no Expo Center Norte, feiras no Transamérica. Eu queria que você falasse um pouco com o Paul da atuação da Nuremberg aqui no Brasil.
O modelo de negócio de eventos na Alemanha é muito particular e foi bom que o Paul, na verdade, compartilhou com todo mundo a razão disso. Eu vejo o Brasil num momento de crescimento. Eu acho que o modelo de negócio está se aprimorando. Eu diria que, alguns anos atrás, os Estados Unidos estavam no mesmo estágio que estamos hoje. Nós estamos nos profissionalizando. Concordo com o Juan Pablo quando a gente diz que as empresas como REED Exhibition, Nuremberg Mess e outras tantas que estão aqui, nós somos grifes na área de eventos. Nosso trabalho é criar realmente uma experiência dentro do pavilhão e criar oportunidades diferenciadas para o nosso expositor. E aí a gente tem que levar em consideração digitalização, mundo digital e outras ferramentas de interatividade do nosso expositor com o público visitante. Vejo com bons olhos o fato de que temos, em São Paulo, cada vez mais alternativas de pavilhão com tecnologia e infraestrutura necessária. Vai demorar ainda a gente ter um pavilhão que está ligado de metrô ao aeroporto. Isso seria o nosso sonho, facilitar o acesso. Aliás, trânsito é uma coisa que a gente não precisa nem conversar sobre São Paulo, a gente não anda, então é difícil. Mas eu vejo com muitos bons olhos, eu acho que, nesse momento, o Brasil está se profissionalizando, nós estamos fazendo cada vez melhores eventos. E eu acho que isso é resultado de parcerias novas, modelos novos com os próprios pavilhões, ou seja, cada um na sua área de experiência e expertise vem desenvolvendo. E a Nuremberg é um exemplo disso. Na Alemanha, sim, nós temos um pavilhão, nós temos vários eventos organizados pela própria Nuremberg. Nós temos eventos que nós chamamos de guest events, são os eventos convidados. Aliás, a gente tem uma grande parcela A cidade de Nuremberg começou na área de eventos por causa da feira de brinquedos, da Toy Fair, que é a mais importante do mundo, que tem exatamente 40 anos dentro da cidade de Nuremberg. E Nuremberg veio para o Brasil em 2009, exatamente buscando uma organizadora, foi uma aquisição de um negócio já existente, e desenvolvendo eventos num modelo completamente diferente da Alemanha, mas um modelo que se adapta à realidade do país e olhando muito a necessidade do mercado local. Eu acho que, basicamente, é isso que todas as grandes operadoras de eventos do mundo buscam no Brasil, os organizadores nacionais, as empresas puramente nacionais. Eu acho que todos estamos buscando uma profissionalização constante desse mercado. O reflexo disso é o aumento de eventos de qualidade no Brasil. E, nesse ponto, eu acho que a UFE e o POU, não por acaso, chegaram à decisão de criar um capítulo América-Latina dentro da UFE, que vai tratar dos interesses da América Latina junto com a UBRAF, no sentido de promover melhor este mercado e de profissionalizar. O que você acha disso, Paul?
Thank you, Ligia, for giving me the opportunity to talk about UFI. I don't come here to give us an advertisement, but a lot of the issues that we've been discussing already this morning do clearly need to be discussed in a regional context. It needs a group of people who understand how the business works here in Brazil, how it's evolving in the rest of the region, and what the particular special needs are. So that's the rationale for the formation of the Latin American chapter a couple of years ago, and we thank you for your leadership role in that. Ligia was elected as one of our vice chairs of the chapter, and I can assure you all is flying the flag very vigorously for Brazil in our activities. So we have no chance to forget Brazil while Ligia is playing the role that she is doing in the, not that we want to forget Brazil, but there's no chance anyway. So, you know, this is the newest part of UFI's sort of global presence. We've obviously, our roots are in Europe. We celebrate our 90th anniversary this year when we have our annual Congress in Milan, which is where we were founded. So all UFI members welcome to Milan in November. We've grown very substantially in Asia over the last 10 to 15 years. We now have 1/3 of UFI's membership in Asia, and our single largest member country is China. So we're very well established there. We have a good presence in the Middle East and Africa, although those are relatively small growing markets. You might be interested to know that in the Middle East, the country which has the most UFI members is Iran, which surprises some people. It's actually a very big exhibition industry in Iran. But Latin America, I mean, our members were very clearly telling us, you know, this part of the world, and particularly Brazil, is very important to us in the future. We need to be talking with the industry here. Our approach, as far as we possibly can, is to partner with the existing key local associations. So we have an excellent working relationship with Armando and his team at UBRAF. We work with AFIDA, the regional federation. And as many of you are probably aware, we currently have as our UFI president the first ever UFI president from South America, with Andres Lopez Valderrama from Bogota. So I certainly can absolutely 100% assure you that particularly during this year, while Andres is our UFI president, we will have a very sharp focus on Latin America and on this part of the world. And it was very much with his encouragement and enthusiasm that he asked me to come here. We had a meeting for UFI members here in Sao Paulo back in August last year. We will try to do something again, perhaps alongside one of the other meetings, just to give UFI members a chance to tell us what they need, what they want us to be doing. But as I say, working closely with the existing associations, The one part of the world I haven't mentioned is North America, and particularly the United States. As in so many other industries, you are all aware, I'm sure, that the Americans have their own industry associations which serve the industry in the US, IAEE, which particularly serves the association organizers in the United States, and then CISO, which is the Commercial Organizers Association, and we work jointly with both of those. One of you mentioned earlier, you know, the different way in which the industry has evolved in Germany and the US. Germany, it grew out of city markets, basically, and the professional guilds in each of those cities working together with the markets. In the US, the exhibition industry has grown almost entirely out of trade associations. And you still have a situation in the US where 65 to 70% of all trade fairs in the US are organized by industry associations and not by commercial organizers. So that's a sort of unique feature of the American market and why it works quite differently to Germany, quite differently to here in Brazil, because of that association role. Associations, of course, are key partners in all of your fairs, I'm sure, but in the US they actually run most of them. So, anyway.
Comentário para deixar essa... Eu vejo que a UFE ela descobriu a América no século XXI, mas, na verdade, isso é o resultado de que nós nos tornamos globais. Quer dizer, o Brasil está inserido na economia mundial e os grandes atores da promoção comercial estão aqui presentes. Eu acho que isso é que nos deu, primeiro, ter chegado nesse estágio e, segundo, essa descoberta da América. Eu acho que é a grande descoberta da América do século XXI.
Obrigado, Armando.
I completely agree, Armando, that we have increased our exposure here. We didn't exactly discover, although I would say, we have had members here in the region since the 1950s. So it's not new, but certainly the much more focused attention on your part of the world, and I completely agree with you, almost entirely driven by the increased importance of Brazil in the global industry. So, you know, a proper engagement with all of you here in Brazil in ways that we hope can add value to your business here in Brazil is a very important feature of what we're doing. But we did know you were here already, but you're quite right. We probably came late to proper engagement with you.
Eu queria agradecer ao Paul Woodward, queria pedir uma salva de palmas dele estar conosco aqui. Obrigado. A Lígia Amorim, ao Sérgio Pasqualin, ao Juan Pablo e ao Armando também. Uma salva de palmas.